Imagine yourself, for a moment, up high. Higher than you've ever been. So high, in fact, that the only things that survive are granite, black, glittering ice, and the sheer power of the wind. Your legs, arms, and lungs burn. Your head feels rent, and your face is freezing. You're the fittest and strongest you've ever been. The ice axe in your hand at your side feels more like a trusted team member than a tool. The jagged blades of your crampons crack into the crisp, icy snow. A vast expanse of shattered rock encrusted with white stretches out below you. A smashed and jagged landscape that emanates immensity, scale, and ragged beauty. It's elemental, it's another world. Imagine it glowing in the deep orange light of sunrise. It's a view that fuels you. It's these moments you live and fight for. You've done it. Mountains afford experiences that are beyond the scope of some lives. They're an environment where impeccable preparation, supreme fitness, clear-eyed judgment, and astute skills comprise the fine line between being an active participant and passing into the spindrift of history. In 1984, Tim Macartney-Snape and Greg Mortimer were the first Australians to reach the summit of Mount Everest. They climbed the mountain by a new route on its northern face without supplemental oxygen. In 1990, Tim Macartney-Snape became the first person to walk and climb from sea level to the summit of Mount Everest, a journey of more than 1,000 kilometres. His record of climbs include Dunagiri, Dablam, Annapurna, Everest, and Gasherbrum IV, among many others. He is a member of the Order of Australia. He was awarded the Australian Sports Medal and the Keys to the City of Sydney for his achievements in mountaineering. He has authored a number of books, including Mountain Adenturer, Being Outside, and Everest from Sea to Summit. He's the founder of the Sea to Summit Company, actively contributes to the non-profit sector, and has multiple films to his name. You're listening to Frost and Cinder. Subscribe on iTunes, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. Also check out our adventure gear store at frostandcinder.com. Type in the code FROSTY for 10% off. Ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the eminent Australian mountaineer, Tim Macartney-Snape.
I started climbing when I was at university, although I'd been introduced to the outdoors really from a very early age because I was born in Tanganyika, which later became Tanzania. My parents had a farm there, and I was always roaming about outside, but it wasn't until I went to school in Victoria and in, well, it was year 10, I guess, that the school had a bush campus, and for the whole year we spent every weekend walking in the mountains around Mount Buller, Mount Howard. That was the first experience I had of being self-sufficient in a mountain environment, and I fell in love with it from the word go. And it wasn't until I got to university a few years later at the ANU in Canberra that I actually got to try out rock climbing. And from there, being part of the mountaineering club, inevitably I went to New Zealand to learn mountaineering, and the club was organising a trip to the Himalayas, so I signed up for that and became a Himalayan climber. From there on, it was just a matter of taking on newer, more difficult challenges once the last one was completed.
How did you feel saying yes to that first Himalayan experience, and what was it like when you got out there?
If you come from a flat country like Australia, going to like New Zealand, the mountains seem pretty daunting and the scale incredible. But of course, the Himalaya are the ultimate mountains on Earth, and the scale there is stupendous. It takes a lot of getting used to. So one's first impression is of being overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task ahead if you're trying to climb anything. Our first mountain was a peak called Dunagiri, which is on the outer rim of the Nanda Devi Sanctuary in what's now Uttaranchal province in Garhwal in the Indian Himalaya, probably a little bit northeast of Delhi, a 7,000 metre peak. Well, we hadn't chosen the easiest approach. Well, it was the easiest approach to our mountain, but by Himalayan terms, it's actually one of the more difficult approaches up the Rishi Ganga Gorge. Very difficult approach because, at least at that time, there was really not much of a track, and being up a gorge, it required the building of bridges and fixing of ropes and steep traverses. So just getting to base camp was like a mini expedition, but from there on, of course, you have to deal with the mountain itself and come to terms with altitude. And my first exposure to altitude, as is everyone's, was shocking. I mean, you cannot imagine how hard it is to operate at altitude until you actually go there. So nothing I will say can prepare you for it unless you've experienced it yourself. Anyway, that's just one of the challenges. And it's, I guess, the main challenge that makes climbing at altitude the ultimate physical test. Really makes everything so much more difficult. Not only just being able to put one foot in front of the other, let alone climb, but also deal with the cold, because when you lack oxygen, your body obviously cools down. So your ability to combat cold is reduced. And, of course, you have the other side effects of being at altitude, which are generally loss of appetite and a headache and nausea. Doesn't sound very pleasant, does it? But, the rewards are that you are in this incredible place, which, it's just the scenery is so spectacular. Mountains just seem to go on forever. It's like being on another planet, really.
Fascinating. It must have been remarkable to be up there for the first time while also dealing with the effects of altitude and developing your ideas around the right equipment to take as well.
Yep, the equipment's an important one. These days I think it's a lot easier because you've got a lot more in terms of resources to research. Mm-hmm. And I guess, back then there was no one I knew. We had a team of 15 of us, all ages, because at the ANU a lot of members of the Mountaineering Club were working for the CSIRO or other government departments, so, they're older and with quite a lot of experience, but none of us had been to altitude before. And so we lacked that experience completely in the team. We lacked, I guess, the ability to do something simple like maintain our stoves correctly so that we could melt enough snow to keep hydrated. We had a huge problem with stoves because they kept clogging, and we didn't understand properly how to clean those particular stoves to keep them functioning.
What kinds of stoves were they?
They were earlier versions of the MSR XGK, and burning kerosene, you have to clean them often, and if you don't clean them the entire fuel line, then they clog up with carbon. So, in retrospect, we should have had gas, but even then gas was hard to come by in India, and even the gas stoves were difficult to source. The other thing, of course, was clothing. We were trialling Gore-Tex. Well-known Australian climber Rick White had just started a business in Brisbane called Mountain Designs, and he imported the first roll of Gore-Tex fabric into Australia, and he made us some Gore-Tex jackets, which we trialled, and it worked spectacularly. He also made us down sleeping bag, down jackets. So without them, of course, we would have been in a lot of trouble. But even so, our equipment was pretty heavy, way too heavy, really, and quite primitive.
So did that Gore-Tex help based on your previous experience? Was there a notable comparison to the previous gear?
I remember testing out the jackets in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. My climbing partner and I did a long route on the south side of Mount Cook, and we got caught in a nor'westerly blizzard which started raining. And because it was a multi-day ascent, we dug a snow cave. And anyone who's dug a snow cave will know that it's one of the best ways to get wet in the snow. But remarkably, with our Gore-Tex jackets and over-trousers on, we stayed dry. It was incredible. So, the fabric actually breathed, and obviously didn't let in any moisture from the rain. And it breathed, so it didn't get condensation on the inside. But at altitude, none of that really counts because it's all below freezing. So you may as well just have what the say in 53 when the British went to Everest, they had Ventile jackets. Ventile is a fine cotton, finely woven, so it's windproof and relatively light. Now, cotton is not a high-tech fabric, but it doesn't matter when it's dry. All that matters is it's windproof.
Yeah.
The other thing which changed incredibly since that first time to altitude in 1978 is boot technology. Boot technology was about to be revolutionised by the introduction of synthetic fabrics materials into the upper of the boot. And that not only made boots waterproof for the first time, but it made them very much lighter.
Yeah, interesting. There was a story of one of your climbs where you were climbing in cross-country skiing boots. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that was a throwback because when we went to Everest in 84 on the North Face, we had a gear dump in the Bergschrund below the face. And I unfortunately, there was a big snowstorm. We left all our gear in the Bergschrund. And after the snowstorm and the requisite time to allow the avalanche hazard to go, we went back up to retrieve our gear, but we couldn't find it. We had not really figured on the fact that the Bergschrund is the leading edge of a glacier. Well, it's a sort of the building edge of a glacier, if you like. So the Bergschrund is where the glacier butts up against the mountain. And a glacier's a dynamic thing. It flows downhill, so it's constantly moving away from the mountain. But of course, that gap between the end of the glacier and the mountain never gets very big because it keeps getting filled in. Now, we'd left our gear in the gap, and of course, during the process of the snowstorm, the glacier kept moving downhill. Snow was backfilling from the mountain, and our gear was probably 20 metres further down the hill than where we expected it to be. So we couldn't recover a lot of our climbing gear. We had ice axes, crampons, boots, and lots, harnesses, helmets. But I didn't have a spare pair of boots, so I lost my climbing boots. I did, however, have telemark boots, which they'd been designed for cold conditions. So with a little bit of modification and using an old pair of crampons that were rigid, I was able to keep climbing in my telemark boots. And in the end, took them all the way to the summit.
Wow, that's amazing. What was that like? Did your feet get cold?
Wearing telemark boots as climbing boots, it was kind of insecure because the problem is they didn't come up very far. They only came up just above my ankles, and being leather, they were pretty floppy. So my ankle kept slipping out of the boot. Basically, my foot kept slipping out of the boot. So when I was on steep ice, front pointing, I had to curl my toes in order to stop my foot slipping out, and it was a bit tedious. But I didn't get frostbite, which was pretty good.
Can you take me through your story of climbing Dunagiri for the first time? You've spoken a bit about getting to the Himalaya for the first time and the effect of altitude and what it looked and felt like when you got there. Can you tell us the story of the climb itself?
Well, as I said, we were novices. None of us had been to altitude before. However, we didn't lack ambition. And the plan was to climb the East Ridge, which turned out to be way beyond our capabilities. Not technically, but just in terms of experience. My climbing partner, whose name was Lincoln, and I decided to do a preparatory exploratory climb up an adjacent peak. And we got pretty high on that, and basically were turned back by our lack of acclimatization when we started not being able to think straight. And the rest of the team started focusing their attention on the easiest route on the mountain, which was the Southwest Ridge. And, well, we didn't get very far because we were unused to the conditions. There's a lot of bad weather, which turned out to be quite a normal thing in spring. Anyway, halfway up the sort of initial steep part of the ridge, we basically started running out of time because we were trying to fix the ropes up the steep bit. So a majority decision was made to abandon the expedition because, well, basically we weren't getting anywhere. It was going to take far too long the way we were going to get in the spot where we could make a summit bid. So the trip was called off, but some fixed ropes had been put up, and being by that time the fittest, Lincoln and I volunteered to go and get them. Secretly, I convinced Lincoln that if it was a fine day when we went up there, we should just continue up to the summit ridge and have a look along the summit ridge, just for a look. Of course, in the back of our minds, we thought, well, if it's fine and it looks okay, we'll go for the summit, do an alpine style. So anyway, we went up. It was a fine day. We kept going, and by nightfall, we found ourselves halfway along the summit ridge. It's fairly slow going because it was quite icy. It was a bit tricky, so we're being cautious. Anyway, we spent the night there. No stove, no sleeping bags, just Rick's down jacket to keep us warm. I didn't even have my overpants on. Anyway, we shivered through the night. The next day, we kept going, and then Lincoln stopped because he thought he wanted to preserve some energy for the descent. I kept going, got to the summit, and then raced back down, shook Lincoln awake, and then we got hit by a storm. It was an electrical storm, so we had to battle not only the wind and snow freezing our eyelids together, but also electrical shocks from the static electricity on the ridge. Cut a long story short, by early the next morning, we'd made it back down to camp. Unfortunately, Lincoln had sustained frostbite in his fingers and toes.
What do you mean by static electricity on the ridge? What was that like? Is that lightning?
Well, basically it was a thunderstorm. So in the thunderstorm, you get a difference potential from the ground to the sky. And, if it builds up and builds up, eventually it'll discharge from any high point on the land, such as a tree or a mountain peak or a church steeple. You'll get a discharge, and actually goes up into the sky, not down into the earth. Yeah, so we were basically the surface of our bodies was just highly charged. You could hear this buzzing,
Wow.
buzzing, and a kind of it like an old style radio, shortwave radio, static. And this was basically the electric charge. And our hair was standing on end.
Wow, that is
So,
unbelievable.
We were very,
goodness.
very lucky not to be in the point of discharge of a lightning bolt, because if that had happened, well, we'd certainly be knocked unconscious, if not killed. So, yeah, we were lucky.
Wow, so you're at altitude at what, about 7,500 meters? You're coming down after summiting Dunagiri, you're traversing a high ridgeline, and you're in an electrical storm, and you're dealing with these electrical discharges and this crackling in the air. That's incredible.
That's the thing about being on any sort of climb. You're committed. You've got nowhere else to go, and we did work out pretty quickly that if we kind of kept low on the ridge, basically we ended up having to crawl along the ridge anyway because the wind was threatening to blow us off. But as long as we kept low, the static was minimised. So if we stood up, it went off the scale. I think the wind was probably worse. The wind was really bad.
Gosh, that's incredible. So you summited, you got below that ridge line, you descended. You were with Lincoln Hall. Lincoln didn't get to the top on that one. He wanted to preserve energy to get back down. Is that right?
Which was a good thing, a good decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got safely back down to base camp?
Yeah. And then Lincoln got airlifted out by helicopter a few days later. We did return to the Himalaya once Lincoln had recovered from his frostbite. We did a couple of small expeditions in India and Nepal, and then I think it was about 3 years later we went to climb the north ridge of Dablam. And it was while on Dablam that I started thinking about Everest, because I could see Everest all the time. And I started wondering about an Australian ascent, and I thought, well, why not do it in good style, without oxygen, alpine style, new route. You got to think. No harm in thinking big, and that's the thing about being, I guess, being an Australian. You don't know any better. You go, well, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So back to the Dunagiri piece. You summited the mountain. You got off it. There was that electrical storm. It sounds like a pretty incredible first experience in the Himalaya. Also, a lot of climbers talk about the descent too. So, you've got Ed Vistas who says that summiting is optional and getting home is compulsory or mandatory. What were you thinking when you're coming down off that first major Himalayan peak that you climbed? And what did you learn on the descent?
Keep going. Yeah, just keep going. Well, you've got no choice. That's the beauty of it. But you're also telling yourself to be careful, because it's very, very easy to make a mistake on the descent. Very easy, because you're tired, you've reached your goal, but as you said, getting home is mandatory. So there's no point in getting to the summit if you don't get back down alive. And it's very, very easy to trip up on the way down, literally and figuratively. So you're constantly on guard, and getting down can often be harder than going up because of that. Psychologically, keep yourself going psychologically can be tough. Very easy just to think, well, I'm going to sit down for a while and never sleep. Well, that's, or if you're hypothermic, of course, that's fatal. But, you could be just completely exhausted. And if you do that, of course, you will get hypothermic and you'll just die in your sleep. So, yeah, you've got to keep going.
Yeah. Do you find that climbing with a partner like Lincoln Hall helps with that? I guess you'd spur each other on, right?
Well, I've only done one big climb alone, and yeah, for sure, I found that it's much more motivating when you're with someone else. It's easier to keep going.
That's incredible. I mean, I have no experience clearly in the Himalaya. I'm just trying to put myself in that position, coming down off this mountain. You're both extremely tired. There's this electrical storm. I can't imagine what that'd be like. I mean, also route finding is it quite a task as well? I mean, is it easy to get lost, or are the routes pretty clear?
No, you've got to have a sense of place. You really do. I mean, the thing is, when you climb a mountain, the sensible climber's always got an eye out for the descent. So you're trying to remember features for the descent, because you know from previous experience that things look different from above, and it's very, very easy. So, it's just a physical fact. The mountain is simply put a series of V's pointing upwards. So when you're coming down, you're faced with all these V's pointing downwards. On a V, it's got a left or a right stem. Which stem do you take, the left one or the right one, or do you go in the middle of it? You're always confronted with that choice when you're descending a mountain, and you only have to go a very little way down the wrong turn before you're a long way from where you could be or should be.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really tricky finding your way down. You've got to have a good map in your brain about where to go.
Did you ever carry willow wands with you?
I never have. I've been lucky to have a good sense of direction, but I think they're a good idea. If you're all insecure about your sense of direction, it's probably a good idea anyway. But they're not infallible because they can get buried in snow, they can get blown over. Nor is a GPS infallible because you can run out of batteries,
right?
Especially in the cold.
Right. Did you ever have time to navigate? Would you carry things like maps and compasses, or is that completely not practical in those environments?
Not really practical. A compass can be on a glacier, whiteout, but on a mountain itself, no, it's not really useful. You're better having a topo, a sketch map, a photo, and what's in, try and memorize it as much as possible.
So what would you say were the biggest lessons that came out of that first Dunagiri climb?
Well, I think the biggest one is about altitude. You've got to slow down, be patient. You will get acclimatized and it'll make it easier. Don't be impatient, otherwise you'll push yourself too hard and burn out. You've got to really pace yourself at altitude. That, and also, I think, be well prepared. If you're not well prepared, then obviously that's going to show up and produce a severe penalty. Like we weren't prepared in terms of stoves, and we paid the price in terms of dehydration. Probably Lincoln would not have gotten frostbite had we had a stove up there.
Yeah. So you mentioned being prepared. What recommendations would you give to aspiring climbers to adequately prepare for those issues? Well,
I'd suggest, we definitely bit off more than we could chew with Dunagiri. We should have gone and done a trekking peak first, gotten experience at altitude, had our equipment dialed, and I've no doubt more of us wouldn't have gotten to the summit had we done that. So just take small steps. If you want to go and climb at altitude, then get some alpine experience in a place like New Zealand, if you're an Australian, or wherever else your local mountains are. And then if you want to go to altitude, go to a 6,000 metre peak, get experience on that, and just work your way up from there. Because, you can book on a commercial expedition to one of the 8,000 metre peaks and pretty well have no experience. But I think it's a worrying trend. I don't think it's really a sensible way to go about mountaineering, and I think it's far more fulfilling if you participate in any climb with the requisite amount of experience and not having to rely on your guides if you have them. Obviously, you can do all these things on your own, and that is much more rewarding. Than the trouble is, as soon as you put a guide yourself in someone else's responsibility, you actually removing yourself from the realness of what you're doing. And so the more, the more organised the trip you go on, where everything's catered for, the more cocooned you are from being able to truly experience that environment. If you have to do everything yourself, it really engages you in being there, and I think it's a far more fulfilling experience. And people say, "Oh, but you're being elitist." Anyone can do it, but you got to do the hard yards. Go and get your alpine apprenticeship, then climb a smaller peak. But if you go on a guided expedition to an 8,000 metre peak and you have no experience, then I think it's a far poorer experience. It's a totally different experience, and it's a far poorer one than it could otherwise be.
I think that's a fascinating point to make. What do you think? What do you think you miss if you just pay to get to the top of Everest, for example?
Well, you are not engaging in the whole process. So you're paying someone else to take care of all the organisation and the logistics, and in doing that, you are basically not going to experience it in full. You're not going to deal with the local people to help you get to base camp, and that is, in my view, one of the most rewarding parts of a Himalayan expedition is actually working with the locals, getting to know them, and everyone needs their help, unless, of course, you get a helicopter, which I think is selfish, because you are doing people out of a job who really need that job. And, the local porters rely on trekkers and expeditions to earn extra cash. So anyway, so that's one thing. And also on the mountain, if you are paying someone else to fix the ropes, do all the climbing for you, put up your camps, actually cook for you, all of those things.
Yeah,
it makes it easier. But with everything that you don't do, means that you're not experiencing in full. You're not actually engaging, because what it does is it puts you in a cocoon of, in a bubble, if you like, of selfishness, if you like. So you've got you're just in your own world. You've got this ambition to get to the top. You're not really engaging with or the local people or the mountain environment, because all the important decisions are being made by someone else. And I think it's even a dangerous situation to be in up high, because when you're up high, you need to have all your senses engaged. You need to be fully dialed into where you are, focusing on what you're doing. And I think it's much, much harder to do that if you haven't developed that habit from the very start, where you make a decision on which mountain, what route, how you're going to do it, and you've been involved in every process of getting yourself there. You're in a much, much stronger position, and you're more empowered, and you come away with having had a much richer experience. Just because you've been to the summit really means nothing. It's how you got there which adds value to quality to the experience.
It is interesting to kind of consider your comments and your experiences in light of current trends around getting to the top of Everest. I mean, Everest is continually, more and more. It's becoming crowded, and there are issues with people getting stuck on the mountain. So I think these are wise words.
That's a huge issue. They're huge issues, and in the bigger picture of the thing, you might say, well, it's a first world problem, but it's a world problem, because what's happening on Everest is just indicative of what's happening in the rest of the world. We're becoming, more alienated from reality, if you like, and Everest has become really just another trophy for people to get. And whereas, it's becoming, the Everest experience is becoming more and more removed from what the essence of mountaineering is. The essence of mountaineering is really about the freedom of the hills. So, you and a group of friends decide, you're inspired by a mountain, you decide to go and climb a particular route. No one's telling you what to do. No one's told you that that's the route to do. Or you may have read guidebooks and so on, but you're inspired from within. The desire to do it has come from within you and your mates. And you go and do it off your own bat, and you cooperate, and if you're lucky, you get to the top, and you have a great experience. That is the essence of mountaineering, and it puts you in touch with the natural world, and you appreciate the beauty and the need to preserve it, all of that. Now, as soon as you start removing yourself from the actual reality of doing it, then it just becomes, the mountain just becomes another shallow, hollow symbol to try and build your self-esteem. And we're all insecure, but that is the wrong way to go about trying to alleviate that insecurity. It's far better to try and get in touch with nature, and you get in touch with your own nature that way too. And it's a far more rewarding experience. I mean, you'll get the ego satisfaction as well if you get to the summit, but it's going to be far more well-rounded, and you'll understand the need to be sensitive to the world around you, to have empathy for it, rather than, it's a pressure cooker environment when you get on a commercial expedition where basically all these competing egos wanting to just get to the top. They don't care how they do it. They don't care what they leave behind, because they're not engaged in that. It's a totally different game for them. And, that could be me there too. I can totally see, if I was a banker in on Wall Street or whatever. I wanted to had a bit of an interest in outdoors, and someone said, "Yeah, let's go and climb Everest and get to the top." I can see how you get sucked into that.
Yeah.
But it's not really about fostering the spirit of mountaineering. And everything that being in nature can give you. It's really just a hollow achievement of satisfying your ego, which is it's insatiable.
Yeah.
Once you go down that path, it's totally insatiable.
Yeah.
You're never satisfied. It's like like people who own boats. They get a boat and as soon as they get it, it's not big enough. They got to get a bigger one.
Yeah. Thanks again, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Quinn.
That was Tim Macartney-Snape, one of Australia's eminent mountaineers. We just wanted to say another huge thank you to Tim for his time and insights. The conversation was an honour, a privilege, and a golden learning experience. I hope you enjoyed it. That's all for now, team. Take care.